Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third International Forum on Social Media Disinformation, hosted by the Institute for Data Democracy and Politics at George Washington University. We began our series with the dangerous medical disinformation, scams, and profiteering surrounding COVID-19. Our second forum addressed disinformation in the context of elections, specifically election interference and voter suppression. Today, we tackle another grave harm on social media: the explosion of misogyny and hate that's used to spread lies, to intimidate and silence critical voices in our democracies. We're hosting these forums in cooperation with members of the International Grand Committee on Disinformation, a consortium of legislators working together to protect consumers from social media disinformation. I'm Rebecca Tromble, the director of the Institute for Data Democracy and Politics, and I'll be your moderator today. With our remarkable panelists and witnesses, my job primarily will be to keep us on track and on time. So if you hear me invoke the clock, it's not to rush anyone, but to be sure we have a chance to get to everyone. We'll start with a roundtable discussion, followed by an opportunity for the media to ask questions. Members of the media using the Zoom platform should use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. Please include your name and the name of your news organization, and we'll get to as many of the questions as we can towards the end of the program. Our topic today is a growing concern and could not be more timely. Within the next few days, Vice President Biden will be announcing the woman who will be his running mate. And unfortunately, we have a pretty good idea of what is in store for her on social media. All over the world, every day, women leaders, whether it be in politics, in their communities, or in their professions, these women leaders are targeted with graphic insults, character assassination, humiliation, and threats of violence and death. Social media, because of its anonymity and its potential for virality, is the medium of choice for those who seek to intimidate women, as well as people of racial, religious, sexual, and gender minority groups. In a public opinion survey released just yesterday, large majorities of women and men said they believe social media platforms should be doing more to protect their voices online. We're going to hear today from a number of distinguished women leaders. So without further delay, let me introduce you to our roundtable of participants. Senator Tammy Baldwin is serving her second term in the United States Senate after representing Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District for 14 years in the US House of Representatives. She was the first woman elected to serve in Congress by Wisconsin's voters. Senator Baldwin is an attorney who began her public service career in the Wisconsin State Assembly. In the Senate, she serves on the Appropriations, Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committees, where she fights for affordable health care, education, and economic security for American families. Congresswoman Jackie Speer represents California's 14th Congressional District. An attorney, Congresswoman Speer served for 18 years in the California legislature before being elected to Congress. Her congressional committee assignments on the Armed Services, Intelligence, and Oversight committees perfectly position her to continue her efforts to fight government corruption, protect national security, and speak for the disenfranchised. Congresswoman Speer is also co-chair of the House Democratic Women's Caucus. Renate Künast has been a member of the German Bundestag since 2002. She's a member of the Alliance 90, the Greens Party. During her public service career, Ms. Künast has served as the Minister of Consumer Protection, Food, and Agriculture, and is chair of her party's parliamentary group. She's currently chair of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Consumer Protection. Notably, Ms. Künast worked to get Facebook to turn over information about critics who attacked her online with hate speech and rape threats, but she was denied by a judge who found the posts were allowable. Arisha Hatch is the Vice President and Chief of Campaigns for Color of Change, the nation's largest online racial justice organization. Color of Change has been one of the leaders of the Stop for Hate Profit campaign, which resulted in over 1,000 advertisers boycotting Facebook last month. Ms. Hatch has led numerous successful campaigns to pressure lawmakers, companies, and news organizations to adopt more just policies. Christine Todd Whitman is president of the Whitman Strategy Group, a consulting firm that specializes in energy and environmental issues. She served 2 terms as New Jersey's first woman governor. In 2001, President George W. Bush appointed her the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Among her numerous affiliations, Governor Whitman is a member of the National Advisory Committee for the Women's Coalition for Common Sense, which seeks to reduce gun violence against women and families. And finally, Seyi Akiwowo is the founder and executive director of Fix the Glitch, a nonprofit that works to end online abuse through education, campaigns, and advocacy. Ms. Akiwowo spent 9 years in politics and policy after her election as the youngest female Black councillor in East London at the age of 23. She's also a writer and has spoken all over the world about online abuse. This year, she was named the UK Digital Leader of the Year. Ms. Akiwowo is a graduate of the London School of Economics and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Before we begin our conversation, we're going to play a short video to introduce our topic.
Reporters have always had to defend their work, but the trolling of journalists has grown commonplace. And many female media professionals are dealing with the kind of hate messages that men will never see.
As soon as the series was published, I started receiving an average of 90 hate messages per hour. Maybe Maria Ressa's dream is to become the ultimate porn star in a gangbang scene. So it's not.
Comments about their gender, appearance, sexuality. The language can be ugly and violent. Threats of sexual assaults and rape have grown disturbingly common.
I can say with no doubt that Facebook endangered my life, and now Twitter is endangering my life.
When I launched Sandy Hook Promise, I was warned that Second Amendment extremists would come after me, but no one was able to warn me that. I mean, the idea of someone within 2 weeks of my son being murdered, reaching out and saying, your son's not dead, you're an actress, no one told me that was gonna come.
Social media did not help women in their career and their job, because they always put this information about their personal life. If they are not married, they talk about their private life. If they are married, they attack their husbands and their kids. If she's a beautiful journalist, they will say, oh, she can work as a prostitute.
I used to be a war zone correspondent, but in a war zone, you know where the enemy is. You know what you need to prepare for. You know how to stay safe. In this new landscape, this is intimate. You take it home with you. You wake up with it. It's with you all the time.
I was called pretty much every derogatory term that you can think of for a female.
I walked back out, and there were reporters in the front of the Capitol. And in front of reporters, Representative Yoho called me, and I quote, a fucking bitch.
If you've ever heard the term Gamergate, you've also likely heard of Brianna Wu.
The game developer relentlessly harassed during what became known as Gamergate. She spoke about the male-dominated gaming industry and got responses like this. I hope you enjoy your last moments alive on this earth. You did nothing worthwhile with your life.
Even a video of a man with a skull mask holding a knife up to the camera and saying, Brianna Wu, this is gonna be the last thing you ever feel tonight, me stabbing this through you.
So I received a lot of comments about she's growing fat. Her husband left her because she's a fat slut. Her husband left her because she's let herself go. She's sleeping with all of her colleagues. And it's like, how can you ever get through the grief and trauma when everything about you is attacked? It's bad enough losing your son. You shouldn't have to deal with all this crap as well.
This issue is not about one incident. It is cultural. It is a culture of lack of impunity, of accepting of violence and violent language against women, and an entire structure of power that supports that.
In the short term, it is only the social media platforms that can act right now.
So social media is helping to circulate the fake news, the disinformation, is helping to intimidate female journalists. Yes, for me, I was better without social media. I felt protected. But now with social media, I feel so exposed.
I wish I could rely on the social media platforms to protect me. I wish they would take more action. So far, they're taking steps but they're not big enough steps, so I have to protect myself.
Senator Baldwin, I'd like to begin with you. You have a high-profile, powerful career. You've achieved many firsts in your career. I presume that those firsts and your position have come with many, many critiques. How do you see this issue?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank GW's Institute for Data, Democracy, and Politics for hosting this really important conversation and for inviting me to be a part of it. I am very honored to join you. And I have to say, I hadn't seen the video until just now, and it is extremely powerful, and I relate to it in so many ways. But I just want to—
Senator Baldwin, I'm very, very sorry to interrupt. I don't know if you realize that you're actually not on camera at the moment. It's not a problem for us to hear you at all, but there we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I apologize for that. So thank you so much. That was such a powerful video, and it is certainly, I just was taken almost breathless by watching it and relate to it. But I did want to just sort of set a context of how timely and important this conversation is. First, social media platforms have become the principal way that people receive information and connect, especially during this pandemic. And as an elected official, of course, I use social media platforms all the time to talk with my constituents about my work. And they're obviously highly efficient tools for sharing information. But unfortunately, this also includes the type of information that's inaccurate, malicious, discriminatory, and corrosive to our values and our institutions. But the second reason this conversation is so timely is this month in the United States, we mark the centennial of American women gaining the right to vote. And we are celebrating 100 years of women being more fully able to participate in our democracy. And while we don't yet have institutions that fully reflect the diversity of the people they serve, we do have record numbers of women serving in the House, the Senate, and more women than ever running for Congress. However, that growing number of women seeking and winning elective office has also led to this growth in misogyny and hatred on social media. And it's not simply a problem of lack of civility in our political discourse, although that's an incredibly important piece of this, and we should insist on more civility. But campaigns of misinformation designed to stir up hatred and fear, to divide our communities based on gender, race, religion, and other factors, undermines our democracy. And they mislead voters and discourage people from participating in the democratic process. In 2016, my home state of Wisconsin was a major target of foreign actors using divisive campaigns on social media, trying to influence our presidential elections. And our intelligence officials tell us that they're doing it again. And they're smarter about avoiding the safeguards that any of the platforms have put into place. So I hope this forum can help bring greater understanding of the scope of this problem and encourage social media platforms to do more to address it. We cannot allow online hatred to undermine our democratic process and further the divisions in our nation. So again, thank you to GW for hosting this vital conversation.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Senator Baldwin. Congressman Speer, your leadership role in the House Democratic Women's Caucus gives you a particularly important perspective on these issues. What do you think awaits the Democratic vice presidential nominee, and what do you think social media platforms should be doing?
Thank you, Rebecca. I want to associate myself with the comments by Senator Baldwin and also compliment you at GW and the Institute for Data, Democracy, and Politics for really highlighting this issue. You know, as women in politics, we sort of take these slings and arrows as just part of life. But what we probably haven't spent any time reflecting on is how it permeates everything and how it deters a lot of women from engaging in the process. Ironically, I have headquartered in my district both Facebook and YouTube. So I fully am aware of all the employees that are constituents of mine that these two companies employ. But I'm also very concerned about, certainly as it relates to Facebook, their unwillingness to step forward and be more proactive. I really believe that these platforms have become safe environments for hatred, safe environments for violence, where you can act with impunity. And we have got to be much more responsible in dealing with them. I actually avoid reading my comments on Facebook and Twitter. It serves me no purpose, but I ask my staff to just call a few of the comments that are made from time to time. And here are a few of them. I wish she was finished off at Jonestown. She has a red dot on her forehead, and so does her family. Others have called me a postmenopausal, I won't say the word, but it starts with a C. Or more recently, stop acting like their mother when I criticized Congressman Ted Yoho for his outrageous comments to Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. I've been bombarded with images of myself that have bruises, black eyes, particularly when I was dealing with the issue of Marines United, where many Marines were taking pictures illegally of fellow female Marines and posting them on a special Facebook page that you needed a special password to get to. And you can imagine what that was doing to morale. Probably the worst thing that ever happened to me was when I was in the California State Legislature, and I carried a lot of legislation on child support enforcement. And at one point, it got so bad, the threats got so bad, that I was put in protective custody. At the time, I had a 6-year-old son and a toddler, and had to wear a bulletproof vest, but I couldn't even live in my own home for a period of a week. So those are the kinds of things that probably deter women from getting involved in politics. And you combine that or have it compounded by the President of the United States, who freely talks in disparaging terms about women, calling them pigs and dogs. And it makes it acceptable, and it's not acceptable. So as I think of our female candidates, one of whom will become our vice presidential nominee, we really have a very serious obligation to protect her and make sure that we have her flank. I want to commend Lucina DeMecco, who did the study and wrote the report, hashtag she persisted, when she interviewed 88 women leaders and in 30 countries, and was able to focus on their experiences. And there really is psychological violence that goes on the internet that is unabated. So we are joining Senator Baldwin, Speaker Pelosi, and many other women members of Congress are joining together to send a letter to Facebook, really demanding that they create a safe environment for women to engage in the democratic discourse in our country. And it has to be done, because this is only going to be a means of promoting violence unless Facebook and other social platforms take this seriously and address it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. Thank you for sharing some of those concrete examples, which, I'm very, very sorry that you had to experience those, or, your staff, that anyone had to view those. Unfortunately, those are not at all surprising, right? Very common to experience. I'd like to move next to MP Kunist. Ms. Kunist, if you wouldn't mind telling us about your experience trying to actually get Facebook to provide additional information about those who were abusing you, who were harassing you, who were making threats against you.
Rebecca, let me first thank you all for this debate and being able to sign the letter to Facebook and get the possibilities to find some others from Germany, European Parliament, or Austria, because we are really a lot of women that feel the pressure in the internet and social media. You see, since about 2015, maybe a bit earlier, we see that in social media, right-wing parties, groups, networks are working very strongly against women. We know that anti-feminism is part of right-wing extremism. Which means that women should be at home, get children, deliver food, and do other things, but not speak up for their rights, for other people's rights, and for organizing the future. And I do not have to add to Senator Baldwin or to your video what we have seen. You've seen, I for myself was in the situation that the more I worked publicly, the more I worked against right-wing extremism and to protect other people, I got, tweets and posts starting from "you look ugly," "you are stupid," or there was also digital sexual violence or death threats, everything like that. And after looking at some time on it, I saw that there's a difference between woman and man. Men get also very strong critics, but women get, posts and tweets focusing on sexual violence, on death threats, and a lot of things like this kind of harassment, which tries to push them out of public life, of being parliamentarians, of being journalists, for example. And you see, after sometimes I saw that 36% of women in Germany say they don't express their political opinion or opinions elsewhere in the internet because of fear for the reaction. So I started to go to courts, to criminal court at first, and then I figured out that there, men, but also women prosecutors and judges look at this issue, and they always say, if you are in politics, like being a cook, you are in the kitchen and you must deal with the heat, you see. So they said, you are in politics, so you have to deal with that. But I and the other people were astonished about that. And after having a lot of cases where prosecutors said you have to deal with it, we started action. For example, to give you that, we founded with sponsor money Hate Aid, which is an initiative helping especially women in journalism and politics to go to court. Why? Because in Germany, you don't have to pay money to go to a criminal court, but going to a civil court to get money, you have to pay money first for your judge, for the court. And this is always very expensive and difficult. So we started this initiative to do it. And inside that, I asked Twitter and Facebook to give me the data from some people because I wanted to go to civil court against them. The court in the first state said, no, you have to deal with it. But then I got, in the second level, I got a yes to half of the tweets. Facebook and Twitter gave the data to me, but now it's a bit late. It's difficult to find the people. But for the last 10 tweets, I've now gone to the Supreme Court of Germany, and I tried to get an information or a sentence of the Supreme Court that this is not okay, and I hope we get more power for the woman in this situation. And let me add one thing we are also doing. You see, we are, I could say, nearly fed up by Facebook, Twitter, and others, because it's their strategy that they allow, especially Facebook, right-wing extremism and anti-feminism to organize in their social media. And they are earning a lot of money with it. And so we are doing two things. In Germany, we've got a law which forces social media to delete some of the posts. We are always discussing about this law. We changed it. It's from 2017. Now we've changed it 2 months ago. But this is not enough. We need a harmonized law on European level. What I want to tell you is that I think there is the end of voluntary self-commitments of the platforms. We have to ask them. This is why I signed the letter, to focus on Facebook and their duties. But the other point is we have to find rules. And this is my last sentence. You see, on the EU level, we are now working on a Digital Services Act. We have a 20-year-old e-commerce directive, which is not, focusing on online communication, for example. And in the moment the EU Commission works on the draft, this should come in January or February 22. And I think then we'll be able to have, in about 1 year, a European law against hate speech, disinformation, and political advertising, which is, for example, with fake news or something like that. And I think this is one of the most important points. They have duties, and they cannot only earn money on our backs.
Thank you. Thank you so much for telling us about the experience that you had dealing with Facebook and the courts in Germany, but for also updating us a little bit on the sort of legislative actions that are moving forward in Europe. I think that for the Americans on this call, we can all confirm that Europe is proving to be a much more engaged first mover on these issues. And it would behoove us on this side of the ocean to take note and additional action. Next, I'd like to move to Arisha Hatch. Ms. Hatch, you work with a large network of online activists. Could you tell us about your experience within that community? And in particular, what would you tell us about the experience of Black women online?
Thank you so much for having me, and it is such an honor to be in the presence of so many brilliant, powerful women who are heroes to me and who persist on a daily basis through a number of different types of violent rhetoric and speech. At Color of Change, we started looking into Facebook around 2014. And it started with a conversation about representation and diversity, and quickly moved to a conversation about the deep, troubling impacts that a platform like Facebook, unchecked, could bring towards Black organizers and Black people. What we saw from our members, now more than 9 million across the country, what we saw from partners and activists who were doing racial justice work across the country, what I experienced as a leader of a civil rights organization, is constant harassment that Facebook is unwilling to deal with. For Black women especially, the types of harassment are both race-based and gender-based. And so Black women and other people of color face incredible amounts of humiliation and derogatory speech because of this platform. Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg and several other high-level officials at Facebook have on multiple occasions claimed credit for enabling or emboldening racial justice movements or justice movements across the globe. But you can't claim credit for the existence of Black Lives Matter by day while working to accelerate racial inequalities by night. You can't just keep telling women to lean in the face of violent, derogatory, and dehumanizing speech. How many women, potential women candidates, are unwilling to persist through these types of harms? Companies like Facebook have actively eroded away hard-fought civil rights wins in the areas of voting rights and ethical labor practices. They've opened the digital door to predatory housing, finance, employment discrimination, and harassment, and they've widened the marketplace for racist and gendered hate speech. And it is time for them to make a change. We joined a protest, a boycott with several of our allies, asking thousands of corporate advertisers to pause their spending on Facebook. And through that work, we're successfully able to get Facebook to commit to implementing a civil rights infrastructure and to giving more support to many of the issues that we've brought up over the years. There's obviously more work to do in terms of the release of the civil rights audit and the actually following through with the recommendations, the brilliant recommendations that have been led by many women inside of Facebook to actually make change in the platform. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this. I think that your perspective as an activist who has very frequently dealt directly with Facebook is particularly pertinent for our discussion today. I'm next going to move to Governor Whitman. For those in the audience, I want to note before I turn it over to her that because of the recent storm, Governor Whitman has no power and no internet at the moment, so she's calling in. We'll be able to hear her, but we won't see her. So Governor Whitman, could you please share your perspective on the problem? And in particular, do you think that this sort of abuse and harassment discourages women from seeking public office or other leadership roles?
Well, thank you very much. And thank GW for hosting this because it is critically important. It's something that, you know, with all new technologies, there's the good and the bad. And obviously, Facebook, Twitter, all of these have given people an ability to communicate and to educate themselves in a way they didn't have before. But it's also enabled these platforms to develop that are full of hate and spreading hate. And what really gets it, I think, is the anonymity. Certainly the things that I have gotten, mostly when I speak out about the president, have, first of all, indicated there are a lot of people that need a little more education anatomically because they suggest I do things that just are not possible with a lot of sort of nasty names and things. But the thing is, they do it anonymously. They're too scared to put their names on. And I think one of the things that we have to look at is how do we force these social platforms to require people to identify themselves? Because, you know, in fact, there were a lot of people with these feelings before. We've always had racist and been a racist society, unfortunately, but it wasn't okay to say it. It wasn't okay to act on these things. And unfortunately, I believe this administration has given the nod to people to say, it's okay, go ahead, do it, and act it out. And it's made it much worse, and these platforms have given them the ability to do that. And that is really a big challenge. Of course, we have our constitutional right to free speech, which makes doing this challenging. But if Facebook and Twitter can do what they did today, which was take down the president's tweets on coronavirus because they contain misinformation, it tells me that they can also set some standards here on the type of language used when they're threats, direct threats. I mean, I've gotten direct threats, and when they look serious enough and not just somebody who's sounding off, and you can kind of tell that by the rest of the dialogue that's contained in these things, you have to go and alert. At least what we do is alert the local police so they're aware of it. And if it really gets serious, the state police take a look at it. But I don't read it for the most part. As soon as I see that they're starting to use every swear word. I grew up on a farm with two older brothers, so I've heard just about everything. But I must say they've come up with some new ways of putting these words together. They're unpleasant, they're nasty, and they're scary if you don't have a support system around you. Fortunately, I do, so I just don't read most of them when I see they're going in that direction. If they seem to have a point, of course you read them. But I think an important point that was touched on briefly is harmonization of how these approaches are going to be developed. It's going to be very important that what the EU does is reflected in what the United States does and the rest of the world, so that you can't the people who are very good at technology can't get around it in the way that they seem to be able to do today. It would make a great deal of sense if we are learning and working with other countries. It doesn't seem to be our MO at the moment, but hopefully that will change, because this is a serious problem. I do believe that there are a lot of people, particularly women with families, as you've heard from the representatives and senator, it can get very ugly. It can get very ugly for your families, and most people don't want to put people through that if you can avoid it. You don't always realize how bad it's going to be and what it's going to happen, but it does, and people are learning more and more. And of course, we see social bullying on the internet. That kind of thing has got to stop, because it has resulted in behavior. We've seen suicides go up. So there are a lot of challenges here, not just directed toward women, but a lot of it is this miscegenation that's being encouraged, I believe, by the top, and is allowing people who have always felt this way to be more open and vocal about it. The really scary thing is they're also getting together in groups, and it allows them to do things like set up these quick, whatever they call them. I can't even remember what you call them when you have those quick groups that get together and have a demonstration. And some of them are getting violent. So as we have seen, and that is not a good thing for anybody. And again, that's where social media has to be able to control it to a degree, not to step on freedom of speech, but to put some parameters around what can be said and how it can be said. And we should be, I believe, trying to harmonize that with what's going on and the initiatives taken in the rest of the world. So thank you again for holding this, because I think it's a very important topic to be discussed.
Thank you so much, Governor Whitman. And I think you've made a particularly important point here, that these aren't harms just hypothetically. These aren't just harms in theory, that we're actually seeing these threats being carried out in real life on the ground, and all the more reason that we have to take these things very seriously. So last, but very certainly not least, I'm going to move to Ms. Akiwowo. You have been both a politician, and you are now an activist and a civic leader, and focus particularly on the problem of online abuse. Do you think, from your perspective, and you are in the UK, do you think that things are getting worse? And what should the platforms be doing now?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, George Washington University, the team, and also Reset Tech as well for suggesting to be part of this panel. I think if we're going to tackle the beast that is online abuse and harms, we need to have international solidarity, and we need to be intersectional, as we've heard before. We can't afford to be played against each other. And so these roundtables are super important. For my sins, for some weird reason, at 23, I decided to go for politics because I thought I could change the world. And it was a speech that I made at the European Parliament, funnily enough, about racial injustice that went viral. And it was fine. It was great. I had lots of people go, yes, Black Queen, woo woo, Black Girl Magic. And it was really nice. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to get invited onto the Ellen show, get some free hair, maybe a free car, but none of that's happened. I did think also that Idris Elba was going to finally notice me, but still waiting for him to respond to my many tweets. But what did happen was somebody posted it on a neo-Nazi forum, and then I was on the receiving end of horrific abuse and harassment. And very, very quickly, I was a victim of continuous re-traumatization through the whole process, because there were no services. There were so many gaps in services around mental health, around access to justice. And that's where Glitch was birthed, to try and fill in that gap around advocacy and making sure that when we're talking about online abuse and harassment, that it is with an intersectional lens, because what was being discussed prior to Glitch, and actually what still maybe looms around still here in 2020, is a very narrow focus around online abuse and harassment, not taking into account how disabled Black women experience the platform, how trans people experience the platform, how class also is a factor, how certain vernacular is used. Just 2 weeks ago, I was on a roundtable with our Minister for Digital here in the UK, and heard from the Epilepsy Society, where the abuse that they receive is people maliciously and intentionally sending flashing gifts to people with epilepsy to spark an attack, before they're about to pick up their kids from school or go into a car, and having huge ramifications offline. And so that's why it's super important for us to be championing intersectionality. We have been talking about online abuse and harassment for the last 3 years. We've been talking about the advocacy approach we need to be having in terms of long-term change around a duty of care that tech companies need to be having, and the role and the capacity of legislators to, one, upskill themselves in this arena, to then be able to hold tech companies to account. And then all of this just got worse during COVID. Like, all of this just got immensely worse during COVID. And what was particularly hard was getting funding to look at this research. It's like we went straight into looking at fake news and COVID, and that was all fun and exciting to the men that control power and the money in both tech and philanthropy. But no one wanted to understand how the increase of lockdown measures meant that not only were we making women and vulnerable people stay at home with their perpetrators, but also how when you were able to maybe move them to a refuge, they were still able to continue that harm to their partners. We weren't having a conversation around the increased use of internet meant an increased risk of harm and abuse, when we already knew it was worse beforehand. We already know that women are 27 times more likely to be harassed online. We know Black women are 84% more likely to be mentioned in problematic and abusive tweets. Yet when we knew we were having a lockdown and imposing the workplace on people's gardens, in people's living rooms, and people's kitchen tables, we had no mechanisms or framework to support that transition, to provide guidance to employers around how they support their employees, and even voluntary groups and mutual aid groups, which were beautiful and are beautiful, that have sparked up because of the response to COVID, but no training and guidance around inappropriate content being shared on WhatsApp groups. So yes, the situation is getting worse, and if there is another spike with COVID, another lockdown, we anticipate this getting even worse. And so we asked for there to be an investment in digital citizenship education, because we have to start establishing new norms and behaviors and cultures around the online space, getting the right vocabulary to understand the violence as a continuum online and offline, and raising people to see themselves as digital citizens with responsibilities online, and understand they have a civic duty online as offline. So how can you be a practical ally online and display online bystander interventions? How can you help report and call out abuse? How can you, especially those with larger platforms, help extend your voice to marginalized communities who really use the platforms for as a lifeline? And I'm going to end on this and say that there needs to be a particular look at how the impact of online abuse is having on gender equality. The fact that we're ramping and raving about celebrating anniversaries, we want 50-50 this, we want, to be honest, it should be 60-40, but there you go. But we want gender equality in all spheres of life, but we're not talking about the barriers. And yet again, and this is another barrier that is going to stop marginalized communities being able to take up their space rightfully. And it's having a massive knock-on effect for women entering politics, entering leadership positions. And if we're going to keep talking about gender equality, we have to talk about online abuse and harassment at the same time too.
You've said so many incredibly important things in such a short period of time there, calling out the importance of intersectionality, emphasizing the impact that COVID has had in this entire dynamic, highlighting the need for digital citizenship education. So much meat to get to here. And we will very shortly open things up to a bit more of a back and forth conversation with our panelists. But first, we're going to show one very short additional video.
Integrity First for America is a small civil rights nonprofit that was founded to hold accountable those who threaten the principles of our democracy. What that means in practice is that we are suing the neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and hate groups responsible for the Charlottesville violence in August 2017.
This was the scene in the liberal college town of Charlottesville, Virginia on Friday, reminiscent of images from a dark American past.
In many ways, social media has become the clan den of the 21st century. Social media was central to what happened in Charlottesville. It was central to recruiting people from around the country to come to Charlottesville. It was central to planning every last detail of that weekend, which weapons to carry, and even whether they could hit protesters with cars and then claim self-defense, which is of course exactly what they did.
Then that terrible moment. When the driver of this gray Dodge mows down a group of marchers who were protesting the rally. He rams into one group, then puts his car in reverse and accelerates.
Charlottesville would not have happened without social media. There is no obligation by any social media platform to give a platform to hate and to violence. That is not what the First Amendment says. The fact that this is an effort led by women and by Jewish women at that is something the defendants have made clear bothers them. It has been central to their pushback, and it animates so much of their threats against us, of their supporters' threats, everything from direct threats by our defendants, direct threats also from their supporters, cartoons that look like they came out of Nazi Germany. And it's interesting, the people that they choose to focus on are the women at the front of this effort. Misogyny is almost always the common denominator in so many forms of hate. That is why the biggest line item in IFA's budget is security. And it's critical because at the end of the day, the threats against us, against our plaintiffs, against our team are meant to intimidate us from holding these extremists accountable. And that is not how this democracy is supposed to work. That's not how the rule of law in this country is supposed to work, and we are not going to let it stop us.
Another incredibly powerful, I think, representation of exactly what these problems are. As I promised, we're going to open things up now a bit more to some Q&A and to some conversation between our different panelists. Congresswoman Speer, I'd like to start with you because we have a question that's come in from Ashley Gold at Axios. You mentioned in your opening remarks this letter that you've prepared to Mark Zuckerberg, and that a number of women legislators from the US and beyond have signed. Could you tell us a bit more about whether you'll be collecting additional signatures because there's been so much interest in this, and what you do to plan to follow up on the letter once you've released it?
So the letter will be released later today. We will put it online around noon. We will continue to invite more signatories to the letter from around the world and forward them to Facebook. Our goal is to have a meeting with the CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, and COO, Sheryl Sandberg, to discuss this in greater detail and to ask them to implement the requests that we made in the letter. Sheryl Sandberg in particular is a well-known feminist. She has got to appreciate the power that Facebook has in terms of being the purveyor of misogynistic comments. I'm sure she's been the recipient of them herself. So I'm hopeful that she in particular will take this on as a campaign within Facebook.
Great, thank you. I wanted to talk with our panelists a bit more about the really important issue of intersectionality here. Ms. Akiwowo raised this. I know that this has been a particular issue of interest to Color of Change as well. Senator Baldwin, I know that you are an advocate, a very prominent advocate, both for women and for LGBTQ rights. Can you tell us some about your experience or what you've seen in terms of the ways that these issues intersect on social media?
Oh, there's no question that the specific targeting of members of the LGBTQ community who gain leadership positions is as hateful and harmful as all that we've been talking about. As the first openly LGBTQ member of the United States Senate in its history, there was tremendous social media posting as I was first running in 2012. and certainly as I sought re-election. Like many of the other parliamentarians and our former governor, I, as a matter of mental health, I would say, don't read the posts. I want to be a candidate who is upbeat and working for the people, et cetera. But I do know, again, like my colleagues, I have that support system of a campaign, or in my daily work, my government staff who do monitor. And I was talking to a friend, just to get personal, the other day, just catching up with my friend, and she was telling me that she's very worried because she does read all the comments on either my political or government social media accounts. And she said, I can't tell you how scary they are to read. And it makes me, on one hand, glad that I'm not engaging in that and pulling myself down because of the hatred that's there. Also makes me a little worried that I'm not necessarily aware of how bad it is. I also had again, a personal account rather than necessarily, talking in my role as a legislator, but I was talking to a young Black woman in Wisconsin who's been elected to local office in a county with a predominantly white population. And she spoke at a rally recently to highlight racial injustice. And the comments that she's seen on her public website is very scary for herself and her family, her young children. And she doesn't have that same support system that I have to shield her in some ways from it. So we've got to take more actions. We've got to insist that the social media platforms take more action. But I think, we also have to re-examine decades-old policies that are currently governing these social media platforms, and give them wide immunity to not be held accountable for and not moderate the content that they allow to be posted on their platforms.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. Ms. Hatch, Senator Baldwin has just pointed to the need for the platform companies themselves, the social media companies, to do something specifically about this issue, about the way that these forms of abuse, harassment, and hatred intersect. Given that you've had so much experience working directly with these companies, what would your advice be? What do you think we all need to be doing more of to hold the companies accountable? How do we get them to move in a productive direction?
Yes, it's a big question. I think what comes up for me is that we have to keep the conversation alive. We know after several years of conversation, as we saw from the action that happened yesterday at Facebook, Facebook is actually capable of fixing these problems. They are capable, they have the capacity, they have the intelligence to do it. They just refuse to. And the reason that they refuse to is because they continue to attempt to talk about these issues as if they are neutral, as if there are two sides to sexism, as if there are two sides to racism. And it's because there is an emboldened right wing who insists that Facebook create false equivalences. They insist on continuing to polarize the things that we talk about in partisan ways. And because of that, we are now in a conversation about racism being a left versus right issue, or misogyny being a left versus right issue, versus it being a right versus wrong issue. And so Facebook has the capacity to do these things. They make a lot of excuses around why they're not fighting misinformation or disinformation, around why their employee base is not representative and reflective of our country and our world. These are all fixable problems for one of the smartest, most powerful companies in the world, in the history of the world. And we have to hold them to that standard. If they are unwilling to be held to that standard, lawmakers need to regulate them.
Thank you so much. Congresswoman Speer, I see that you have your hand raised. I'll let you jump in here. I do want to note that we are getting close to time. We'll likely go just a couple minutes over if that's okay with everyone, but I will now need to ask each to keep remarks quite short. We're getting quite a few really important questions from the media as well. So Congresswoman Speer, if you'd like to respond.
The fact that Facebook could take down a post from the president about the coronavirus, but couldn't take down a post that was a manipulated video of the Speaker of the House that was seen by 2 million people on Facebook, much greater than any other platform, and was shared 90,000 times, suggests the power of that one entity and why they have to become more responsible.
A very important point. MP Kunist, I've noted that you would like to remark here as well.
Yes, let me shortly act. You see, I'm a bit fed up by Mark Zuckerberg always telling us, oh, sorry, we didn't see our responsibility. This is what he said years ago when we were dealing with Cambridge Analytica, and the question why and how did Facebook give personal data to them without having a clear way to delete this data so that they are not misused on this point. I think the first thing we have to do is to recognize that now for women's movement, it's like in the 70s when we all fought for seeing domestic violence, seeing how women and children are violated in a closer social room, and to make the society recognizing this and acting on this was in the same way a basic fight like it is now to fight for our equality in digital life or in digital scenes. So otherwise we will be pushed out. And so one of the points is to tell what is happening. So I hope that with the letter to Zuckerberg and Sandberg, we really get thousands and thousands of women worldwide signing it to show them that they all focus on the same situations. And the point is, telling what is happening is always the first step to make a change. And what I also think is, before saying voluntary is not enough, we need the legislature to change. I think it's also, and that is what I bring in from Germany, to try to find and develop institutions and structures that help women, not only us being in parliaments, but also women that are activists, for example, that will not be able to fight for their rights. So we have to build up a lawyer and financial structure. This is part of the fight against this act.
Thank you. Governor Whitman, we're getting a lot of questions from journalists about what our panelists would expect the vice presidential candidate, when she's announced quite soon, to see coming at her. You've been in executive leadership. You've been within the administration of George W. Bush's administration. What do you predict is likely to come for a woman at such a high level?
She's going to get a lot of extremely abusive language, and she just should pay no attention to it. She is going to be given one of the highest opportunities that any woman can have. And she has got, it's unfortunate but true, I mean, women have had to do this forever. She's got to rise above it. This is going to be brutal because, as we've said, this platform allows people to do things anonymously, say things anonymously, free speech. They're allowed to do it. And so they feel empowered to go ahead and say whatever they want, wherever they want. And it's going to be ugly, but she will have a support system around her. And I think all the women that are anywhere around need to stand up for her. And every time you see this kind of abuse coming forward, to step on it right away and to demand that these platforms do what they can do. As I said earlier, because they were able to take down the president today or yesterday, whenever they did it on the coronavirus stuff, they can do it. They just won't. They make money, frankly, off the usage. A lot of people get excited by this kind of language, but it has to stop. We have to put some parameters around it. I do hope we do it in concert with what's happening around the rest of the world, because there are other countries that are ahead of us on this. But she is going to have to really depend on her support system, and everybody, all the women who care about this so much, have got to be there for her too and let her know that they're there and that she just can't read this garbage.
Senator Baldwin, the same question for you. What do you expect and what would you advise for the woman who will be in this position?
Well, I want to just reiterate what Governor Todd Whitman just said, which is I would recommend that she not get sucked into reading all of the posts and comments, but that all of us form a support system around her and that we have her back, that we call out as much as we see and call that out directly to the social media platforms, but also do our role in educating the public that this is happening. We can play a very powerful role and draw it out, because this is why this conversation is so important. Is we need greater recognition that this is not acceptable, that this causes psychological harm, that this interferes with our democratic institutions, and that we need action.
Thank you so much. We are now just a few minutes over time already. And I regret that we haven't had more of an opportunity to really fill out this conversation. But I am incredibly grateful to each and every one of you for joining us today, for participating, for sharing your experiences, all of which are incredibly important. And I, of course, want to thank everyone for persevering and continuing to take up these issues and advocate for women, for people of color, for members of LGBTQ+ groups, for other minority groups who face these daily onslaughts on social media and often simply go unheard. I think it's particularly important that we note that the impacts are not just online. This is not a phenomenon that just, right, is something that you can wash away because it happens to you online. There are real consequences for the people who experience this. Today is our final of these 3 forums. We've covered a number of incredibly important topics, from COVID-related mis and disinformation to hate speech, to electoral manipulation and voter suppression, and today to the sorts of hate and misogyny that members of underrepresented and historically marginalized communities face online. The important message to take away from these forums is certainly that the platforms can do more. And we as a group are calling on the platforms to step up and take further responsibility. So again, thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you to those in the audience, both members of the media and the public at large. We call on each of you to join us in working to improve on this situation. And once again, I am Rebecca Tromble, the director of the Institute for Data, Democracy, and Politics. On behalf of the Institute and George Washington University, thank you, and I wish you all well.